Hello, this is Dr. Jackalyn Rainosek, and I'm with DTP-Leadership Group. And this is Hot Topic Bold Talk. And I am so grateful because Nigel Lakey has been a very dear friend of mine for several years now. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. But we can talk to each other, and we have ways that we'd like to share with you how you can talk with somebody that has a different point of view and learn from each other and have a friendship that is lasting so we can find some solutions to things that are going on in our country. I know that Nigel will talk some more about it, but I know right now that we have such extreme positions going on and people not being able to let go of those extreme positions, so they can't talk. And I imagine that 30 or 70 or 80% of the people in America could be somewhere in the middle and we could really talk. So, Nigel, first, I want you to introduce yourself because you have many accomplishments.
Well, Jacqueline, thank you. And here we go once again, right? Let's board this train. Uh, so just, brief reflection, and then I'll say who I am and why I'm here. But, we've had these conversations in the past. A couple have made their way to podcasts. Otherwise, they've been over lunch or at professional society meetings. And there's a bit of the history there, I guess, that brings us to where we are at this station, ready to get on the train again. But as to me, I'm, I'm one of those old white guys, if I will, and excuse my saying that, but, I'm 45, 46 years upstream oil and gas service industry. I'm a mechanical engineer by education, but probably more of a marketing and technology manager by profession. I got out of that business a few years ago and I've retired kind of up into the hills west of San Antonio. But I stay active and I pay attention to things, and that's one of the reasons Jacqueline and I have spoken at length and on a lot of things. And again, that's what brings us here today to have this opportunity to, can we say, have an adult conversation. And you mentioned the people in the middle. I don't know who we're really trying to appeal to, but it's people in the middle and it's people on outside and the fringes. But let me make this comment if I will, right? We're not going to talk about headline issues, and we're going
Mhm.
to avoid the outrage that always seems to come from headline issues. And I think anybody who would listen to us or who has listened to us in the past probably has experienced that. They may be middle, they may be at the fringe, but certainly they've been in a conversation where it just goes to outrage. And how do you have a conversation with people? I shouldn't even say you've been in a conversation, right? It starts off as maybe a small debate, but quickly turns into an argument.
Right.
And I personally have had a couple of friendships that have disappeared as a consequence of that extremism, right? So, I think while we've had some conversation around what our topics would be, but may I suggest one of them is to say simply, how do you have conversations with people?
Right.
And if we, if you think about how you have a conversation, then maybe you can avoid those moments of extreme and outrage and all that sort of thing, lead a little more peaceful life, and probably preserve some of the friendships that have been important to you.
Well, and I think you've really hit it on the head truly, because I think, see, I really respect you and I care about you. And I value your friendship and your point of view. Sometimes we don't have the same viewpoint, but we seem to be able to find a way to put our views together so that we can have a discussion and I can learn from you and you can learn from me. Because I'm the PhD in this group and the one that's been the coach and the consultant for years. And I think our combination of you being the engineer and me being the PhD, somehow we come together and look at things. I want to say that you mentioned losing friendships. There are times I've had in the past, because I have done a lot of programs to support people appreciating different points of view. And there are several times I've had people in my groups, Nigel, that are not capable of hearing a different point of view. And so they're very hard to deal with. And what I see them doing is being very sarcastic or putting real sharp comments together that are what you call the headlines. They will either use the president's name, or they'll use someone in the Congress, or they'll do something in which they're so invested in that they want to have you or me accept that they're right. And so I know one thing is I don't come to the table with you and think I'm right. I come to the table with the idea that I'm going to talk to my friend Nigel. He has different experiences than I do, and he has different points of view a lot of times because you know, you've been all over the world. So that's one of the things that I would say about talking with people is you've got to come to some place that you want to maintain a friendship and you want to know what that other person has to say. So that's what I can give so far, and I'll be happy to hear anything or where you want to go with this conversation.
That's a segue to a lot of things. But let me say this from the friendship side of things, right? And most people, when they get into a conversation, frequently they're just waiting for the other person to stop talking so they can inject their point of view, right?
Mhm.
Now, partially as a consequence of a more classical education. I grew up in Western Canada, right? My parents were immigrants. We learned about social studies and civics and geography and all sorts of things
Mhm.
in elementary school and even through high school, right? That tended to disappear somewhat in university. But I immediately, upon getting into the workforce, got on airplanes and started to go places and talk to people. And you can't, I'd say my dad said this to me, right, as a salesman, never talk about politics and religion. And
Right
I,
on.
I think I've tried to hold on to that. And there are times when I think you can have those conversations, but they should never devolve into a shouting match. But let me go back to briefly to travel. You say I've been to a lot of places. I have, right? And um, I used to have control over about 5 or 6 languages. That's somewhat of a lost art now. But you you're trying to meet people and you have to be culturally aware.
Mhm.
And the cultural awareness really can only come from one, a desire to be aware and show respect for the people. And then that typically involves or demands that you do some research so you have a better understanding. And it also really sets that you have to be a listener. So when you meet somebody, different culture who struggles with the English language and you don't speak Arabic, how do you have a conversation, right? How do
Right.
you build a relationship? So it's not just having a conversation. Um, in business, you're trying to build relationships, right? And really what you want is that person to be an advocate for you and what you believe in so that they think of you and they drop your name and refer you to their peers, that kind of thing. Then you can say that you got a bit of a relationship, right? But it's something that comes down to trust. And if you insult people, you lose that trust. It disappears very, very quickly. It's one of those things in business and life that uh, you spend a lot of time building up this, bank of trust, and you can spend it in a heartbeat. And look, it can be anything from just a, moment of inflamed passion to, substance abuse. But you have to be so cautious of it. So look, you and I have conversations not because we're careful, not because we're scared to have an opinion, but I think it's important that we understand this gets back to the headlines, right? That these people have an opinion. They're vested in something. They're looking for votes. And, somewhere we've just become so polarized. And look, this is everywhere. It's not just the US, but for the immediacy of our conversations, right? We're concerned about what's going on in our country.
Right.
For anybody that wishes to see the demise of an administration, give your head a shake because that serves no purpose. We don't want to set this country back. We want this country. People say it's a great social experiment, but I think it's past an experiment. We could say it works pretty well. So let's not blow it up. And I think if you can talk about the underlying issues, like why do you feel that way, then you begin to understand. And these typically, it could be economics, it could be religion, it could be a number of things that drive people to those thoughts. But
Right.
you really have to first understand them. And I think that's the way it is in business. That's the way it is in life in general. And if you don't network and don't build relationships, you end up being very, very lonely. So the worst thing you can do is get into that inflammatory rhetoric and exhibit the outrage because guess what? Everybody just walks away hurt. And I don't think that solves any problem. So, you know what? The newscasters, the rest of the politicians, all these people, they should start paying attention to that sort of thing. And I'll say to me, it strikes that the press has so much to do with this. In the old days, there was one national broadcasting corporation pretty much in every country, right? And they had to present an in-depth analysis of local news and international news. And that newsreel often got on an airplane and got flown in. So it wasn't like they could shell out to somebody live standing on a runway. And I think also there was more respect for the culture and can we say, the social aspect of things, right? And now you've got 100 news channels or more. I honestly don't know how many news channels I have on
Right.
my cable program, but it is dozens. There's local and there's every possible affiliate. But to me, they're in a marketing war. They've got to hold on to an audience somehow, and that almost demands that you get into extremism. So I don't
Right.
want to go there. I'm more concerned about how you keep the wheels on a country, how you manage our banking system, national security, those sorts of things. And look, you can have a lot of good conversations around those, and you don't have to exhibit any outrage.
Right. And I think there are several points you've made, and I want to take some of them and pick them up, and then I'm going to ask you a question and then come back and cover some of the other topics because you covered a lot of them. One of the things that I think is really important is you have to understand the culture that the person came from. You know that I grew up in Texas, in West Texas, and for a very long time it was Democratic, but then there was the John Birch Society that took over Odessa. So I know a more conservative, sometimes considered extreme position that I grew up in and started to get to know. I knew that I wanted to be able to talk to people. I know that you grew up in Canada, and we've talked about, too, the values we have. For an example, my high order value is social justice. Then the other values I live with are honesty, spirituality, service, and then taking risks to be able to talk with people and believe that I don't have to be there with an agenda with you, that I can listen. So talk to me a little bit and then let me go to some of the other subjects you covered. Talk to me about your values because I think that's one of the things that brought us together because you may have different words for your values than I do, but we have values that cause us to respect each other. So you've heard mine. Give me
Yeah,
some of the values that you have.
no, I appreciate that. I'd say one is trust and integrity. It's it's difficult to live a reasonable life um, and have to look after your past and protect it somehow, right? So can you say there's openness? I want to believe generally when you meet people that you can trust them. So
Mhm.
there's an extremely important value there, right? And look, that doesn't mean you have to be the same. Um, there's a word, I'm going to say it's comprehension. And maybe that's not the right word either, right? But it's the awareness of a cultural issue, the distinction, the individuality, that sort of thing. So I don't expect everybody to think like me, act like me. And it's a mistake to walk into a room thinking that everybody does think, act, believe in the same thing, right?
Right.
But in the hierarchy, uh, can you say of attributes, that integrity, trustworthiness, because that's the only thing that you've got. And I'm trying to think of what's the phrase? Your thoughts become your actions become your legacy. And it's a little bit longer than that. But if you if you struggle with that, I think it becomes obvious. And I know a lot of
Right.
people who struggle with that. One, it's the self-awareness even, right? Um, and it's the acceptance of difference. I'm
Right.
not sure that those are values or attributes, but when I think of talking to people, whether it's in a business or a social environment, I, I want to keep those things in mind, right? Now, just briefly, you mentioned political party affiliation. I think that's one of our problems too. We're identifying ourselves as this or that.
Right.
And it's almost, people say, where are you from? You have those social exchanges, right? The last thing that you really would say to somebody when you meet them is, I'm a card carrying whatever. So it's,
Yeah, and
it's
I
an
think that's
attribute, right?
true. Yeah, and I want to say that subject because you just brought it up. But I want to show people something. Trust and integrity are extremely important to you. Honesty and spirituality and being of service to people has a lot to do with what you've just said. If I'm honest and I have a spiritual connection with myself and then know that other people have something, no matter what their religion is, then I can then establish a very trusting relationship. So, one of the things that I've found, Nigel, in talking with individuals that have so much different points of view from me is if I can get them to talk about their values and I talk about my values, then we can have a conversation. We're not talking about headlines. We're talking about who we are. And I'll give you a quick example. And I do want to get to the naming our political positions. Um, I talked to a gentleman that is running for a position as judge in my state. And we could tell as we had a conversation that he was in one party and I was in the other. But what I said to him was, what if we could learn something from each other? And I said, what do you value? What is something you said you believe in service? What is something that you really look for in service? He said, I want to make sure kids in America are fed and they're taken care of. And I want to be sure that animals are taken care of. And I just started laughing and I said, you've probably named the two major focuses I have. I cannot stand to have children not have what they need in life to grow and change. And the other thing is, you don't mess with animals because I love mine and we have three cats and that's really important to me. So we started there and we started having some conversations and we're going to have more. Now, you may want to talk about some examples where you've seen the value and whatever, or we can go to the political thing next. But I want to be sure you have an opportunity to comment on what I've just said.
So look, the values here. Everything that we do, we filter it. I believe, anyways, you filter it through those values, right? It's how you interpret something that
Right.
somebody says or an action or something, right? And look, I'm a believer in animals as well. I got three rescue cats. I can't almost stop collecting them. And they're extremely important to me, as frankly as irritating as a cat can be sometimes, right? But
Right.
these things, they're part of my existence, my life, and I love them dearly. Though one of them would make an excellent pair of slippers at some point or another. But again, back to values. Let me throw out this Judeo-Christian heritage, if you will, right? And forgive me, but there's a set of values associated with that. And it's honesty and integrity. It is a bit of spirituality as well. It's less about religion than it is about spirituality.
Right
And
on.
there's issues surrounding a spirituality, right? It's honesty, it's integrity, it's being good to people, it's respecting life, that kind of thing. So the values, I think if you understand those, if you lead with them, they become important. And if you find yourself in a situation, and I've mentored a lot of people as they've gone through, employment crises almost, which is why am I here? What am I doing? They're on a performance improvement plan. What do you
Yeah,
do if you want to keep working? Maybe not at this company, but in this industry or whatever. Then you have to lead with values. People need to understand what you stand for when you walk into the room. And
right
part of
on.
that's it's predictability. It's less about that they say, I know exactly what that person's going to say or exactly what that person's going to do. That's not necessarily healthy. But if a person walks in and you've established that the first thing we're going to do is learn to trust each other, so that demands integrity, that demands honesty, that demands that the conversations that are had in the room stay in the room, this sort of thing. This is mostly a business
Right.
perspective, but I think it works well in a family dynamic as well. So now, to some extent, you've established how you act, what you think about. And people would say, I understand those values, or I don't understand those values, right? But if they understand the values and the counter is likewise true, you start to get to a place where you can now have conversations, where you can develop. And it could be corporate issues, right? We're trying to change the culture within an organization. So, what are the first things we try and establish? A set of values, and typically
Right.
they're pretty specific in a corporate environment, right? Because often they identify or go to the identification of some of the problems, the challenges that the enterprise is facing. But look, I take your point wholeheartedly that establish values, lead with values, and if you find yourself in a place where you got to check your values at the door, that's probably a place where you oughtn't be because there's going to be some conflict, right? And if you end up conflicted with your own values, I don't know how you sleep, how you're going to be successful. You're probably going to be miserable. So state your values, live with your values, evaluate your values from time to time. But they're critical. I think they're really the foundational issues, right? And you learn those growing up. And it could be that you share your parents' values. You may not in some cases. But I think I believe certainly that has caused you to have a set of values.
Well,
And
and I think let me interject something here. My values determine what I'm going to do. And my purpose in life is to be real and live in truth. And it took me a while to come to that purpose. But with the values I have of honesty and risk taking and service and all those things I mentioned before, I'll give you an example of how they define how I take action. I had a friend call me and he started telling me about this board and how he had real difficulties with it. And he wanted me to be on the board because he thought I could be helpful. And I listened for a while and I said, you don't need me as a member. You need me to be a consultant to your board because you have so many conflicts going on. I could not possibly sit in a boardroom with what's going on now. And I need to be in an expert position where I can feed forward so that we can move forward. Because I said my purpose in life is to be real and live in truth. So you're going to find that me only doing short comments periodically about what's going on is not going to be helpful. You're going to have to do something else. So he hired me as a consultant because he knew that I was right about what was going on. So I make my decisions a lot today when I see someone that is inconsistently honest or own their behavior when they have done something that is inappropriate or harmful. I watch. And if they keep doing that, I'm going to name it, and then it's going to make a decision whether I'm going to be their friend or not. Because I want to do the same thing. I'm going to work hard at owning what I've done that has created a difficulty and then listening to see how we can work through that so we can continue the conversation. And that's really important to me. And I think that's also important to you. And I'll shift for a minute, and then of course you can make any comments. One of the things that I think people and maybe I'm wrong, but the reason I named that you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat, we could also say that we have you have more conservative positions on things and I have more liberal positions. We could name it anything. But I think people need to know that we come with the knowledge that we are different in the way we view things so that they can see as we go into topics in the various sessions the third week of the month that we're not similar in every way. We are different, but we can sit and I can learn from you and you can learn from me. So, as far as I'm concerned, from now on, they don't have to know what our political party is or what our position is. They'll probably hear it in the way we describe ourselves.
Well, look, I think
Uh,
that's true. The mistake is saying that here's the starting point. Um, yeah, and look, I think if people reflected back on our earlier podcasts, right? My conservatism is one more of, can I say, the Reagan Thatcher era, which is give me smaller governments, give me give me systems and processes that benefit people, et cetera, right? Look, I think it's very important that national security and armed forces and a handful of things like that. Now, you may disagree on some of those as a priority, and that's all right. But I don't think that we would look at each other's priorities or values and say that's foolish. And I wish you to fail. And I think that's the fallacy that if you first identify a political affiliation, where we've talked about things that are important to us, we've been like, how about that? An educational system that works. Huh.
right.
Healthcare system that doesn't bankrupt people. Huh. How about that? Secure borders. We all agree on those things. I think the inflammatory response from kind of a medical perspective there comes from somewhere. There's an irritant that gets into the system, a burr under the saddle, grain of sand in your shoe, whatever. And you can rise to it or kind of brush that aside and say, we've got some systemic things we got to get our heads around. And I firmly believe that irrespective of political affiliation, well, likely, right, that the real challenge here is to get people talking at a common level. And I don't know how to start that. And to me, it kind of takes us into a social fabric that's not in very good shape. It takes us into a place where, we're not looking after veterans, we're not looking after mental health issues. And look, I
Right.
don't know where that came from. And the nourishment there is not standing on the corner and yelling that it's somebody else's fault. The value really should be saying we need to do something about this. So let's look for those common things. And look, I honestly believe that if we get to that point, maybe it takes a generation or two of administrations, but those are the conversations I want to have. And if we don't have them, then again, we just fall prey to this yelling at each other. And
Well,
the
and I think, yeah, and let me say something because you're making so many good points. I want national security. I want a support of our military. I want decisions made about our military personnel that supports them in having the best plan possible when they need to take action. I want them to have qualified people that are directing them in the action they're taking so they can be successful. I I want to say to you too that I think that well, let me put it this way. You want smaller government. I may want it somewhat larger so that we can provide the support I think that we need that I see is missing right now. I'll take one subject. I think women's positions in America have gone backwards, not forwards. And I'm concerned about the factual data I have around the women that have died that are pregnant because of some of the guidelines that have been set. Now, what I'm saying though is if we can have smaller government and have a healthcare system that truly allows people to be treated in the healthcare system and be able to afford it, then I don't care what the size of the government is. I'm more worried about the service of it. So somebody that's probably labeled themselves as I have would think, what is she doing? She's agreeing more with what Nigel is saying. I think it's more the topic and the things that I've seen changing because I spent the 1960s being a tremendous, and I've been an activist all my life. That is one thing I would say I am because I stand up for things that I believe need to have a socially just position in order to take care of American citizens. And so, how we do it is how I'd like to come with you and say, okay, we both want X healthcare for Americans. So how do we do that? And how can we afford it? And what do we do to take care of it? So please,
Those are two really important things: is how do we do it and how do we afford it? And I think that's where the gap really starts to form, right? Because
right,
it's a sense that government can fix all this. Well, the government's an agent of the people, and I think if we went back to our civics and social studies, we should recognize that the government is an agent of the people. The government exists to do the things that we think are important, that we voted on, et cetera, right? To take the capital P politics out of it, but put the lowercase politics in. And just a passing comment, I think the one of the greatest instruments on the face of the earth is the United States Constitution, Declaration of Independence.
amen.
And I say that as an immigrant who showed up in this country to let me in, right? Now, we can talk about interpretation of things, and that's not to you or I don't think at this early stage. But if we said, how do we do healthcare? Well, you can't just throw more and more money at it. And that's the place where we start to see gaps. And anything that we're talking about, you can't just throw more money at it. We're facing as a country, as a society, this staggering amount of debt that is
Right,
absolutely unsustainable. And it's every damn buddy's fault. It's not one versus another. It's because
amen.
we as a society have become accustomed to that. And that's a habit that I'd really like to break. And it's one thing that if we say we've got this debate and we've got this outrage, well, let's think about where that came from. And it's easy to pick a single issue or two issues or whatever, and no matter who you are, right? You can generate outrage on that. But the better educated people, and my apologies if I've offended anybody there, but it's a purposeful statement. The better educated people, and this is not necessarily degrees, but it's people who choose to be informed,
Right,
read, understand the political history and social history and that sort of thing. Probably those people who are better educated can now have a better conversation and make better informed decisions. I think we've just got runaway capital P politics on every side for everybody. And those are the conversations I really don't want to have with anybody. It's not just you, right? To be honest, completely candid. It's the people who choose to get into those kinds of debates and arguments. Man, that's
right,
just no fun. I want to understand why we're in this position, what you and my neighbors are going to do, help, right? Do you have any
right,
interesting ideas that I should know about? So, I think we're after more of that free exchange of information and less about just yelling opinions back and forth. But again, how do you manage this? And it's a rhetorical question, but you can't just create a bigger government or more agencies. And everybody is doing that. So can we step back from that and say we have to be of service to the population? What do we need to do?
right,
This the society's got to survive. So let's not injure ourselves. Let's not destroy our own society chasing after some political belief. And you and I have had those conversations over lunch and in past podcasts. I mean, my hope is that other people listen to this would take a minute and go, man, that's a conversation I need to have at the next church social or the HOA meeting or something.
right.
And to me, it'd be a great place to start, right? And I say it may take a couple of generations. I hope it's not a couple of generations of humanity. I mean, that's like 75 or 80 years. But maybe there's a spark that starts an intelligent conversation that leads to some changes. I mean, I just have to hope that society and we as an American people can do that.
Well, and I think what I'd say to you is, I think you're right in the fact that, and I really support what you're saying. See, I grew up in the era where we had civic classes that we studied the Constitution and we knew what the various civil rights were and so forth because we were educated in the schools. That has stopped. And what I see now is we have to have, that's one of the reasons I'm doing podcasts. Now, some people may not like some of the positions I'm taking, but I'm trying everything in the world because you gave me some, more conservative news things. So I read them now, and I try to combine both with what I normally read, and see if I can say what is the issue that's going
Yep.
on with something. Because see, if you and I can define what the issues are, then I think, and if other people would define what they think the issues are, let's say for healthcare, and we could all talk in our various small groups and then say, who can we reach out to know what we can do? And I'll give you an example. Um, and I'll name this. I'm a member, I've been a member of Unity Church Christianity for a number of years. Now, one of the things that happened about 10 years ago when things were getting out of hand, they decided as a Unity Church to connect with the Unity Church in a much more conservative area than the one that's in Houston. And then they would have conversations, and they've had examples of it in things that happened. I think, you know, we all live in different small communities, but if we start talking about what we've had as a conversation with our friend, I don't have to name you and put you out there. I can just say, I'm having this conversation with my friend. Now we're doing it on podcast, so we're putting it out there. But we want you to see that no matter whether you have a different point of view or not, you can do something. And when you and I get to border discussions and some of the things, you and I may have different points of view about it. I don't know. We haven't had those conversations. We'll see what happens. But I'm curious enough to know what you think and feel about these situations. And I want to say something, Nigel, from my background and then my professional career. If you don't feel and don't experience your feelings and process through them, then you're going to create conflict because people react from feelings and from these extreme views that they generate inside and then feed. So I have to feel. See, I feel comfortable in talking with you because I know something. No matter what we talk about, we will continue talking about it till we both can live with what our conversation has been and know it is comfortable. My father taught me one thing that I remember all the time. When I'm doing business deals with anybody, no matter what business deal I'm doing, he always said, you may not always like all the aspects of the deal, but can you live with it and feel comfortable enough to commit to it? And that's something I think needs to be done. I think what you and I are doing is just saying, it doesn't matter what the differences are. Let's talk about them and see if we have any solution about how we can get back to a country where persons of color are appreciated, where women have the right to do whatever they need to do to take care of their health, or where we have a healthcare system that we can provide to people and where they can pay something for it, some part of it, where we can see that we are contributing to the health of, our citizens. So I'll stop there and leave you
Good,
where
because
you can go with it
I'm just
next.
waiting for you to stop talking so I could start.
I know.
No, look, I think there's an important issue here that underlies a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today. And I'm going to say that that's our own social values. And like I think as a country in Western civilization is just, they failed miserably on that test. We
Right,
don't teach that any longer. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the disease is that underlies that. Okay. Part of it is, part of it is unfettered immigration. Part of it is just this weakening of the social fabric. It's the marginalization of people who are religious, the marginalization of cultures, and this all seems to be done in the furtherance of some other idealism, which escapes me. And again, this is doesn't matter what parties, and I'm a student of this because I've only been a citizen for a short period of time, collective, generally. So, I had to take a civics course, if you will, so I could stand in line at the immigration court. And if I were asked the questions, say how many articles in the Constitution, et cetera, right? And as it turned out, I was not asked any of those questions, but yeah, I chose to make myself aware of those things, not
right,
only for fear of being asked, but I thought really should understand this, right? I've chosen to become a citizen here, and I need to understand where this all comes from. Now, having said that, if we think back to the words that we've exchanged here just on our own personal values, right? Can we get back to that and say that we got to take personal responsibility? And somehow in, marketing and advertising, we've all been taught that we've got to have a new car, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. There's just something that's been broken there culturally. And I'm going to take it back to just lessons in civics and socioeconomics. And it's just not to say that, oh, part of the population has got to be in poverty, part of the population's got to be wealthy. That's not it. But there is a thing that you brought up, which is, early on we're taught personal responsibility. That
right,
you can't just hang anybody else out there and say, well, I lost my job because of, maybe that's the driving factor, but ultimately it's how I chose or you chose or somebody else chose to respond to that stimulus. It kind of gets us to the outrage thing, right? And
right,
I keep thinking of the stuff that I've taught in business, the stuff that I've lived, and I'm an advocate of two pieces of work, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, and
right,
leading change. And I've taught those in business environments, tried to get organizations to go through the cultural issue. And part of it is to be reflective, look at the circumstances and understand that it's my response to things that takes me to a place I am. So can we get
right,
back to let's assume some responsibility for our own behavior? I think that that would be a great step in curbing inflation, maybe. I think it would be a great step in improving the overall healthcare system. It'd be a great step in improving the civility, the conversations among people. Now, like, yeah, that may be seen as simplistic, but if we stopped indoctrinating people and started educating people, and that goes to every Western civilization, in my opinion, in fact, a lot of civilizations, then we'd be better off. And I don't know what drives people, right? At a political level, they feel that either they've got to get the outrage, fan those flames, or take such a ridiculous position somewhere to appeal to a set of voters. And I think we're at this point where, we're seeing a very small population of eligible voters actual vote, and they tend to be the people on the fringe on any side. So how do we get
yeah.
back to, understanding the issues and looking for solutions and not just blaming everybody? I'll get off my soapbox there, but
No, but I want to get on your soapbox and I want to talk about something. 38 years ago. Now, let me say something. In the work I do, the first thing that I really work with people on is whether they are able to emotionally process through their feelings to then determine what is the next best action. And I have a simple form that I use. You write down what you feel about a situation, you write down what you thought, and then walk away from it for an hour or two and come back and look at them and see what is really not appropriate thoughts and feelings that are feeding your negativity, and what can I do to take the next right action. But here's what I know. 38 years ago, I started saying to myself, because I've done a lot of work in the field of addiction. So I know what the various multiplicity of addictions do to people because they lose their values, they lose any concepts of spirituality and connection with something greater than themselves, and they lose so many things that they then are not present to hear and understand what's happening. So that's one thing. So 38 years ago, I said, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to figure out the 10 top groups of behavior that organizations do. And then I'm going to create a course that I can show that I can transform cultures in organizations and build really authentic relationships. Now, it's taken me 38 years. And when we're not on a podcast, I'd love to show you what I've done because I did it with 3 organizations. And there's one in particular that's a county organization. I had a number of people in my class. And the head of the organization said, I've been in training 28 years. I have never seen anything you presented. It's all about behavior and then the behaviors we need to change. And he said, I've never seen it. But he said, I know one thing. You've agreed to teach an individual here at our organization how to teach this course because we can't afford you as much as we'd like, but we want to do this in our organization. And so I taught the individual how to do it, and that's what they're doing. But I know something. Those individuals that sat in the class, when I asked them at the end, I said, what is something you're going to take away? 1 or 2 things. And then how do you feel? And the common theme was, I never realized how many of the 24 blocking techniques that she showed me that I've been doing for years. And one of the guys came and spoke to my friend in the organization and said, I took the blocking techniques home. And my wife looked at him and said, 3/4 of these are things you do that I do not want you to do. So continue taking that course at work because I want you to change the behaviors. Another thing that happened with this course is there was an individual who started a lot of political discussions and was pretty sarcastic and inappropriate. So he didn't get promoted because people couldn't stand being around him. And my friend had tried to tell him for the last 10 years the reason we wasn't getting promoted or anything else that's teaching the course. After the course, he came into her and he said, because there's another thing I teach. If you've messed up, don't say you're sorry. Tell what you did that's harmful or inappropriate. Tell how you feel about it and show some remorse. And then tell how you're going to change the behavior and see if that's reasonable for this person about how you're going to change your behavior so you can continue talking. And so what happened is he went in and apologized to the woman. And he said to her, I've talked to my 5 friends. I'd like for they're in our organization. I'd like for them to be in this class. And we've decided we are no longer going to talk about politics in the organization. If we want to talk about politics, we can talk about it after work. But we have no business in creating the havoc we've created. Now, if that can happen, and I know that, and I would love to talk to you about that course, that I've created. I think that people can change their behavior. They may never change the values or some of their perceptions about things, but I do know something. If this individual who was so committed to creating conflict around politics can change his behavior and say, no, I've talked to my 5 friends and we're not doing this anymore because we want to be able to contribute to this organization in a positive way. and we want to be able to talk to people, and I want to get promoted. And my wife's already told me, because it's the same person. My wife's already told me that I've been exhibiting these behaviors and she doesn't want me to exhibit them anymore. If we can do that, because here's one of the biggest behaviors I see people do. They want to give excuses and justifications about everything they've done. So they
I'm gonna
waste a massive amount of time never looking at what's going on. So I'll stop
so
now. It's your turn.
uh, you've hit on some really key issues there, right? One of them is self-awareness, and there's a value there, I think, right? No, I truly believe, I shouldn't say think. You should be taught, and most of us were taught to understand the second order and third order effects of your actions. Listen before you speak, think, understand what's going on. And I'm going to jump around here a little bit, right? But when you think about behavior, there's been so much of this pop culture shit. Read this book, it'll solve all your problems. Listen to this
No.
podcast. Here's 5 steps to getting promoted in your job. And I guess it's this quick fix mentality, right? We don't want to actually put in the work.
Yes.
And I was going to say, how do we, society speaking, start to change people's interpretation and their behavior in that regard? And to me, maybe that's the root here. Right? We think about having these conversations and you think about healthcare, you think about a lot of things. If it just got back to this whole premise that understand yourself, understand your behavior, understand your responses, understand your triggers. And look, there's some deeper psychology there that's pop culture is not going to fix that either. But if it's just the self-awareness, and I'll remark, I've been through coaching myself and I've put a lot of other people through coaching, executive coaching, otherwise mentoring programs, right? Just trying to change basic aspects of their behavior. And where I've put people through coaching programs, I've been explicit. I don't want to know what you talk about with your coach. I want the two of you to decide on two things that are absolutely important to you. And the coach is going
Right.
to help you solve those things. And then at the end of this session, after we've paid $60,000 or whatever, I'm going to ask the coach, were the objectives realized? And what will be the benefit of the objectives? What will be the deficit of the objectives? And you find typically that people go in there, with kind of stupid ideas. Well, I want to learn a second language, whatever. But probably in the first month of a 3-month program, that person has somewhat crumbled. The facade's gone. They've recognized that there's some deep, deep-seated behavior issues that have got to be fixed.
Right.
And I've watched people come out of that changed, but I've also watched them when I'm no longer their manager, they quickly revert back to that. So I'm going to say they were bullshitting me and their coach. But there have been cases, right, where they've been made self-aware. And I'll just reflect on an interview that I had for an executive role that I was conducting. Met an individual who looked really good on paper, but frankly had no self-awareness, couldn't understand. And I don't know if it was naivete, I don't know if it was ignorance, or I don't know if it was just absolute arrogance. But the individual couldn't understand why they had not been selected for executive roles. They got great marks, they were executing, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought if you just listened, you've answered your question, which is you are patently not self-aware. You don't know and you're not listening and you're not paying attention to what's going on. So is that a place? I mean, as we're getting towards the end of our hour here, what's a message that we'd put out there to people?
Well, here's the thing, because I think we've identified some things that are really important. One, in my profession, there are people that understand habitual patterns and they know how to deal with them. And others do not understand those habitual patterns, so they reinforce stuff that is not helpful. So that's one comment I'm going to make. So I have some problems. I choose the people that I work with because they have to be able to own their behavior first and not point the finger.
Mhm.
at someone else. They have to be able to process through their feelings and truly be able to come out of a very difficult situation and say, I owe you an amends because I need to say to you, or I owe you an apology is another word to use. And here's what I did. Here's how I feel, and I feel dreadful about it. And here's how I'd like to behave differently. And would that be acceptable to you? I think that's there. The other thing I want to say is I think self-awareness takes knowing the behaviors that are destroying your ability to do things. So
Yeah,
in 1993, I finished a 17 behavioral grouping inventory. Anybody can take that inventory and then they can have an hour and a half with me with no fee. And that's true of my partner. She will do the same thing. What it shows you in 17 different groups of behavior, what you're doing to destroy yourself and sabotage yourself from being who you really want to be. The reason I developed transforming cultures and building authentic relationships, and I've had the chance to do it 3 times and it's worked, and it's a lasting change. It's not, it's a lasting change that I see in the people because I have continued to follow through with those individuals to see.
we've got a signal drop here. You're saying you'd follow through with the individuals? Yeah, there we go.
Sorry about that. I live in an area where we're only 4G because we have some problems. So I'm not going to worry about it because we've got
Okay.
a conversation going here. What I'm saying is I know ways that we can talk about how we do make changes in people's lives. But the key thing is that you mentioned the person has got to be willing to do the work to make the change. I don't think the guy lied to you. The guy that you were the or the people you were talking about that went to the coach and then they reverted back to their old behavior. I think they never committed to making the changes and they didn't realize it. And then they get away from you and they get associated with somebody else that reinforces their old behavior and they start back.
Exactly. So these, and you can't name names, of course, but these are people that today are wondering what happened to their career trajectory.
Amen.
So,
Amen.
you know, um, we are not going to change anybody's political outrage briefly, but I think there's a message here that can we build on this, right? And it's not clear, but if we said self-awareness, think about why you're thinking like that. I think that does work, to be honest. I believe that that's a good place to look for opportunity. Is why do I feel this way? And this aligns well with Seven Habits and a handful of other things, right? Professional development that I've done. But I believe it's also a place where you got to steer people away from that pulp culture. A self-help book, maybe some of the older ones, the How to Win Friends and Influence People. They were, I'm going
No,
to
no,
say,
no,
more
no. Wait a
honest.
minute. Wait a minute. There's one thing I do with all my coaching clients. I tell them, stop reading anything of pop culture. I want
Okay.
you to read things that will help you focus on yourself and your behavior. And I'm going to ask you to take my habitual patterns assessment so you'll see what you're doing to sabotage yourself. So I think we have to stop some of those things. But I want to tell you something. I think our next topic needs to be self-awareness. Now, my background comes from being a therapist for 18 years and then being a coach, and combination of two, I've been in business 48 years. So that's my background. Yours is another. The leadership challenge is probably one of the reason I use it to teach leadership is it requires personal development.
Yeah.
You can't get through it without it. So you're doing the same thing with the things that have been most valuable to you. So I would ask you, how would you like to end this conversation today? Because I think we've got some very valuable things. And we can choose as our next topic self-awareness. Because there's another thing I want us to talk about. I'm looking at all the bookstores, and they have wonderful, beautiful covers of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and all that stuff. And I want to go buy one and just say, read the thing and talk with
Mhm.
Nigel about it, and let's talk about how we lost that perspective. But I'm very willing to start with self-awareness.
Well,
So,
I don't know, I guess. I was just thinking about the thread of the conversation we've had here today. We've been talking about personalities, types, and we can put anybody on a board, right? And that's one of our first tendencies to say there, you're this personality, Myers-Briggs or
right,
DISC or whatever. We want to avoid that. I think the generalization I would take is that if you're not self-aware, then you really can't manage your own behavior. And then you can't look past your behavior to say, I need to learn more, understand more.
right,
And maybe that's a place just to put a pin and say, a thread that we're going to continue to pull on is this self-awareness. Why am I doing this? Why do I feel this way, right? Understand your behavior, what drives it. And then the self-awareness part would be, can I change that? Do I want to? And look, there are people who don't want to. They like the outrage, etc., or they're scared of admitting a frailty on their own
right.
and telling their friends that I don't really believe this. We're not. Well, certainly my objective is to try and change anybody in that regard. But if we said we've got this gap, we'd like to see something that sees survival of society, the betterment of people in generally, the reduction or eventually the elimination of all this outrage. There's a place to start pulling things together, right? And one common thread there has been self-awareness, but the other issue is greater than that, or other issues. There are things like an education system. We need to talk about that. We need to talk about what the expectations are. If you're on a school board, what do you
Right
need to
on.
be aware of? What is it that you want your children? What do you represent? What's the values that you want them to bring up, right? There's a legacy. Um, there's cultural awareness. There's things like that. There's just the stigma that seems to stick to anything and everything because somehow we're forced to accept that. Everybody's got a label they want to put on themselves or others. Can we think about how you get past that? And if we stop labeling things and we stop making them so special, and then maybe the outrage begins to diminish because we just recognize, well, we're people with a common set of values and interests. And we're having deeper philosophical discussions, but is that a reasonable place to pick up? I don't even know
And
if
I
there's a
think,
place to pick
well,
up there, but
I think there is a place to pick up. What I would say is, in order to have self-awareness, you have to go through the process of looking at how you behave, what your values are, and how your attitudes and beliefs really impact how you behave and what you do. And if we combine all those together, then we have what we call self-awareness.
we
Now,
started this.
I look forward to all the other topics they
Yeah.
have. And let me just say this. I'm glad we started this way. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't care if my internet went off. We still got a great program, and I'm going to put it out there. And so, my final statement to you is thank you for being my friend, and thank you for going through this process with me. So, you're welcome to say something too.
Well, just in closing, right? We started off saying, "How do you have a conversation?" And we'd be naive to think it's just this talk about how you're civil and this sort of thing, right? We're deep into behavior psychology. That's not a bad place to end up. I don't know where it takes us because it can be a rabbit hole, of course, and probably somebody's going to get offended somehow in all of this because we're going to call it personality traits and but it still carries on this concept of how do we have conversations. So the self-awareness part of it, the values, uh, that's been a good lead up to that. So I'd be fully in agreement thinking of the next place is some more self-awareness, and that can lead to elimination of outrage. It can lead to hopefully more productive conversations that take us to a place of change and improvement. And I would say there's a value that I like to carry on, which is that if somebody were to say, "What time is it?" the answer is always, "It's time for change." So it's
Amen.
status quo cannot be accepted. And I've got a little statement I wrote up, right? I'll bring that up next time, and maybe we can touch on that. But we can't accept status quo, good or
Amen.
bad. So let's find a way to have a conversation that leads us to change and improvement. Make it better, make it worthwhile.
Thank you. And what I'd say to our listeners is to simply go through and listen to this conversation and then think how it can stimulate your thoughts about your own values, about the things that you think you're self-aware of or not. And join us again because every third week of the month, Hot Topic Bold Talk is going to have Nigel Lakey and myself having conversations. So thank you so much. And I'm going to end this podcast
Thank you, Jackalyn.
today.
See you in July.
Hang on just a minute.